Chapter 6. After traveling away from the region of Box Butte for many days, the people settled down into winter quarters in a deep valley with a high ridge on either side. There it was protected and cozy. Let the blizzard do its worst over the desert uplands, it could not hit them broadside down there, even though they could not entirely escape it. As usual, in winter they dispensed with the regulation camp circle and broke up into small communities, occupying the sheltered bends of the winding creek. The very large Tashbais preempted entire bends, while small groups that were congenial gathered together to occupy others. Thus, a series of villages were strung along the creek on both sides. To go visiting, one must follow the timberline instead of cutting across a common or following a curving line of teepees as in summer. It was a most sociable winter, for another camp circle had joined that of White Ghosts by prearrangement, thus doubling the number of people. Such an encampment was always to everyone's liking. That winter it was most agreeable, so many people, the oral historians would be saying for years to come. Each teepee was so placed that there was room to build a stockade of windows around it, with a runway between, where it was always somewhat milder than outside the stockade. The willows, set very close together, served as both a shelter for the teepee and a stable for the horses during severe storms. The people always went to great lengths to make their homes secure against winter. The teepee poles were all planted into deep holes, except for the hoisting pole by which the tent was raised. It was left resting on the ground, as always, and the entire framework of poles was anchored by guy ropes fastened to the top. These could be carried around and tied to heavy stakes in case of bad weather to brace the teepee against the prevailing wind. And finally, a single rope was dropped from the top into the teepee and left tied loosely to one of the rear poles where it was out of the way till needed. Then a stake was driven into the center of the teepee, back of the fire, and to this rope, the rope was tied very tautly to hold the teepee down solid. Bluebird took great pains to make her home both comfortable and ornamental inside, with an elaborately decorated dew curtain that went completely around the room and was tied to the poles to the height of her shoulders. It hung straight down, and its lower edge was tucked beneath the fur rugs under the bed spaces. The space between the teepee itself and the dew curtains provided a circular storage space where she kept surplus food and robes. It was always noticeably colder in this storage space than in the teepee, thus further insulation was provided. Backrests with fancy robes thrown all over them, sandal bags, and other containers filled with the nicer gowns and other apparel, standing smartly around against the dew curtain, and long, narrow Teton pillows, plain on one side for the night and worked with porcupine quills of many colors on the other for the daytime. All these touches helped to enhance the teepee. Such touches were a woman's pride, for they reflected her industry in preparing skins and her artistry in decorating them. On the left side, as one entered the teepee, was where the man sat, ate, and slept, and the right side was where the women of the family belonged. The space across the back, behind the fireplace, was called the honor place, for there all guests were seated. As one entered, the first space to the right of the entrance was for fuel and drinking water, while the corresponding place on the left was for casual callers who dropped in for a little while and did not care to settle in too far in, because they must leave shortly. It was this caller's space where Little Chief sneaked in his pet dog during stormy nights and kept him hidden. Grown-ups frowned on the practice of letting dogs stay inside, and the old grandfather was especially firm in the matter. "Grandson, do not arbor your dog inside," he would say. "It is not done. Dakota dogs should be as hardy as their owners. It weakens them to be kept in." And each time Little Chief would comply, only to repeat the practice when again his heart melted with pity for the shivering dog. Perhaps it was already unfit for storms. Quite different were his grandmother's sturdy wood-gathering dogs. They were as important and useful as pack horses. 8 noble and intelligent creatures that did all but speak. Gloku had provided a small traverse for each of them and made a set of harnesses of rawhide for pulling it. All day the dogs stayed on duty, for they knew their responsibility not to stray beyond call. When she announced her intention to go after wood, they were ready. "Ah, my friends," she would talk to them, "you never fail me." The lead dog was especially fine, a huge wolf-like animal by the name of Burnt Thigh, because Gloko got him from the Burnt Thigh or Brule band of Tetons. In the morning she would call, "Burnt Thigh, where are you? Today you and I are going after fuel. Come." Soon Burnt Thigh would crawl into the tepee and sit up on his haunches in front of his mistress to be decorated. With her ceremonial vermilion paint, she would first make a round circle on his forehead, and then a thin line down his nose to its very tip. He would close his eyes and submit willingly, even proudly, to this little rite as though he knew what it meant. "There, now we are relatives and won't be disloyal to each other," she would say half solemnly. "Let's start." Outdoors the other dogs would be assembled and waiting, their tails wagging vigorously and their feet dancing, all eager to be off. She would harness each one in turn, talking to it all the while and calling it by name as she worked. Soon as she would walk away toward the wood with her dogs in a single file behind her, often to be gone the greater part of the day. Late in the afternoon she would return, the little procession following her, each dog dragging a disproportionate-looking load of fuel. Unhitching and feeding them was also a ceremony. She offered them food as generously as her store allowed and thanked them in formal speech. It had been a late fall this year. The weather did not get noticeably colder for a long time, even when all the natural indications, like the position of the stars and the behavior of the birds and animals, said it should be winter. A great deal of life was still being lived in the open. Women tanned hides pegged to the ground outside, and men went out daily to hunt small game, while children found themselves new playmates among the villages nearest their own and joined in games. Black Eagle's group was an especially happy place. Everyone was delighted over the marriage of Rainbow. His mother was particularly pleased and said on all occasions, feeling quite sure that it had been largely her doing, "Have you met my new daughter-in-law?" she asked her women friends. "She is a truly fine woman, so capable, and withal so kind, gentle, and respectful to her in-laws. One who knows her kinship obligations deserves nothing but respect in return." And then one night Gloko had a dream that for the time at least put an end to her preoccupation with her new daughter-in-law. A dream so vivid that she could not shake it off. She dreamed she stood on a great butte and looked eastward. Far off, on another butte exactly like the one where she was, a huge man stood looking at her. She knew him at once, though there was a distance of 4 days' journey between them. He was a certain Yakutan Dakota medicine man and diviner who had once treated and healed her father. This man was famous throughout all the Dakota bands because he used no herbs. He was so holy that he healed merely by the spoken word. Everyone revered and feared him. Gloko and he stood staring at each other, and the thought came to her, "Can it be that the holy man has a message for me?" Whereupon the man nodded, slowly to indicate yes. While she wondered what the message might be, 4 immense crows flew past her in a line, and she said, "Can it be that after 4 nights I shall be in danger?" And again the man nodded yes. But now she could see him only dimly, for a sudden fog moved over the land between them. And she said, "Can it be that I shall be rendered invisible?" For the last time, the holy man nodded yes. After that, she awakened with a heavy heart and was bothered all day. She went about her duties mechanically until her eldest daughter, first woman, whom she described often as being direct and outspoken, remarked brusquely, "What ails you today, mother? You are acting very strangely." But Gloko denied that anything ailed her. "If I tell my dream, it will surely come to pass, by other minds dwelling on it to induce it," she told herself. She lived through some rich hours, and now it was the 4th day, the day. "If I can somehow get through this day safely, then I shall be free. I can laugh at that dream," she said to herself. But she was not laughing yet. She stayed close to people, and though the ordinary shunned idle gossip, she actually sought it now. It was so normal and human. It looked as though she would get by until a certain old woman who gadded about regularly came to see her and invited her to go and pick roseberries. "Cousin," she said, "I did not come merely to eat and pass the time, but to have you go with me to the ravines yonder. You should see the roseberries now. So plentiful, so big and fleshy they are. Let's get in a good supply while we can." Gloku wanted nothing so little as to venture from home. "Oh, who wants that common stuff?" she said. "Not while we are all well supplied with buffalo meat, the only real food." Her caller pretended to scold her. "Don't spurn them so, cousin. There always comes a time when the meat is gone and we'll be glad for a pudding of roseberries. And who can ever say when a famine may overtake us?" Gloku gave in and went with her. It was as her visitor had said. The berries covered all the rose thickets like one continuous red blanket. They were able to fill their containers rapidly and were soon safely back home. Gloku sighed. "Well, that's over, and you've had your way. Now sit down and eat some of my best corn cakes before you go." The old woman was ready enough to eat the delicacy, but had no intention of going home yet. "I thought we might also go to the big river to get some real water," she said. "It is so much better than the salty creek water." And somehow they were again on their way, past several clusters of teepees along the creek that flowed eastward to empty into the big river. After the last camp, they still had to cross a lonely stretch of bottomland, where coarse slough grass grew tall and thick and useless all summer, to die each fall, only to send up new shoots each spring until accumulation of crops countless years formed hard clumps that made walking very difficult. Gloku complained as she went. "What a place to walk, today of all days. I wish I had never come." "How headstrong you are," but her companion feigned not to hear, quite satisfied to have her way. They found that the bank was high and steep, and they had to make a path of sorts to reach the water. The nights had steadily grown more than chilly, and thin sheets of ice had formed along the edge. After drinking some water, Gloku hurriedly filled her container and climbed back to wait on the bank, but her companion took her time at the water's edge. "Hurry up, let's go home, the sun is already set," Gloku kept urging her in vain. At last they were starting back when suddenly some terrifying war whoops filled the air as 3 men appeared on the bank upstream and made a dash for them, brandishing their tomahawks as they came. "This is it," Gloku cried. "I was warned of this. Run for your life. You wanted so badly to come." And then, hardly knowing what she did, she grabbed up a handful of sand and tossed it behind her as she ran. Leaping over the huge clumps with miraculous ease, she literally flew. Not until she had reached smoother ground did she dare look back. The men had her companion down and were beating and scalping her. Gloku stopped at the first village and gave the alarm. The men who immediately went out brought the injured woman in and said the enemy had already left without a trace. The woman died that night. For days the members of the Soldier Society formed scouting parties and went carefully over the surrounding country, but the first snowfall that night covered all tracks. And years after, this was Gloku's prize adventure story. Whenever she told it, she began with the graphic dream, which she was sure was a prophecy. And in describing the way she threw sand behind her, she would explain, "I was led to create a fog like the one in my dream, and it rendered me invisible." She never failed to conclude with an extraordinary report that came out of the neighboring enemy tribe some years later, during a truce. Some of our warriors claimed that a Dakota woman vanished before their eyes. That was morally certain to the day of her death, clinched her story. That harrowing episode ushering in the winter might have been an evil omen for the days ahead, but it did not turn out that way. With many tribesmen living together and with plenty of food to last the winter, the people looked forward to a good season, and got it. There were always storms and blizzards, of course, but they were milder than on the flats that could be endured, as they always had been. Winter was not the season for great gatherings. There were no big feasts, no ceremonials, little if any dancing. All of those activities were better suited to the milder seasons, when the people lived in the camp circle formation, with the council teepee in the center. As always, there was plenty to do. There were the usual winter sports, with target shooting and hurling the wooden snow snake over the ice or snow as the men's principal games. Bowling on the ice with round stones was for women, and especially young girls. The Moccasin Game, a guessing game requiring skill and sleight of hand, was played by both men and women, though not in mixed groups. It was enjoyed in the teepee during winter, though better outside in good weather, when great crowds could stand around and try to follow with the eye the lightning movements of the players' hands as they shuffled the hidden markers back and forth to confuse their opponents. Indoors, women players in pairs engaged in toss and catch with deer hoofs, and sometimes in the plum pit game, a favorite of old women particularly. It was something like dice. The tiny markings on the pits, and the almost always limited vision of the old women, especially in the dark teepees, made the accuracy of the points claimed a matter of doubt. But they enjoyed it anyway. Enjoyed it too, occasionally wrangling over the score. In both the toss and catch and the plum pit game, and for the matter of the ice bowling and the rest, both players and spectators indulge in betting trinkets. Boys spun cedar tops on the ice, whipping them to keep them spinning as long as possible. Smaller boys dramatized the old owl myths, dressing up fantastically and wearing masks to resemble the owl spirit as they imagined him. They went around from teepee to teepee and from camp to camp dancing. The audiences asked them to foretell the weather, assuming they had come from the north, where winter weather was made, and then gave them sweetened corn cakes and pemmican mixed with wild fruits and similar treats. Little girls played with their own dramatic games, some with singing, while small tots like Waterlily tried to understand very simple games outgrown by their immediate predecessors and passed along to them. Women visited around as they found time during the day, and in the evenings congenial men gathered in the teepee of some person of prominence, whose personal charm drew others to his company. There they sat, sometimes long after midnight, smoking and talking and lunching, occasionally amid much laughter and gaiety over funny stories and jokes. All kinds of talent came out. There were those who clowned cleverly on purpose, and those whose behavior, comical by nature, unintentionally sent the company into roars of laughter. Those who could entertain by singing, and those who told stories professionally. Of the last group, the most famous was called Woyaka, he tells. Woyaka was a raconteur of exceptional skill and had a phenomenal memory. He was known everywhere in every camp circle, for he sojourned in one or another as it pleased. When he joined the White Ghost people for the winter, everyone was delighted, looking forward to the time when he would come to tell stories, for he went the rounds as the head of various groups of families invited him. Meanwhile, in winter, no less than in summer, the constants of life went on. Men and women worked, children played, old men sat dreaming of their youth and their past glories in war, and old women fussed over their grandchildren, for whom they would give their life if necessary, caring for them continuously and forgetting themselves in doing so. Always the young people went about subtly with an eye for one another, and some people were marrying, and some were dying, and some were being born, all the nature and acceptable things that happen wherever humans live together. It was a good winter all around. The day came when there was a great commotion in Black Eagle's group, because Woyaka had finally got to them and sat in the teepee of Black Eagle on his special invitation. It is important to me, that good leader said, that the children of my relatives sit at the feet of a master and learn tribal lore from him. They must hear the myths and the legends. They must know our people's history, and to that end they must listen to the winter count, he said. The winter count was a dramatic calendar of years that began with the previous winter and worked back in reverse chronological order. Woyaka was the man to give this, for it was said he alone could recite it further back into the dim past than anyone else, 300 winters and more. Each year was named after the most important event. Not only could Woyaka name off the years, he could, if asked, give the full story of the event referred to. They hold a buffalo calling ceremony. Many expectant mothers die. A many afflicted with sores kills himself. A bear spends the winter with people. Where are some of the arresting titles that made the listeners wish they dare interrupt the flow of Waka's recitation to ask, what killed the mothers with the unborn children? Or how cold was it that a bear moved in? Or was it from shame or pain that the poor man killed himself? Or how were the buffaloes summoned? By whom? And did they answer? There was no denying Woyaka's gift as a storyteller and historian. How he became that, he told his youthful audiences. Regard me, my grandchildren, and observe that I am very old. I have passed more than 80 winters. Many a man of lesser years finds this eyesight fading, his hearing gone, his memory faulty, while I retain all of my powers and memory and remember everything I hear. That is because my grandfather had a plan for me, and he never rested in carrying it out. The day I was born, he looked on and vowed to make me the best teller of stories that ever lived among the Tetons, and to that end, he never gave up training me. I was, you might say, my grandfather's prisoner, for I did not have the liberty enjoyed by other boys. I did not go out at random. I did not run with my own kind or engage in idle play. Well, might you think my childhood was austere, for at any instant, without warning, my grandfather would grip me firmly by the shoulder until I winced. He, being a powerful man, now tell me, he would say, what was that you heard last night? And woe to me if I could not give it step by step without a flaw. Gravely he would tell me, grandson, speech is holy. It was not intended to be set free, only to be wasted. It is for hearing and remembering. Since I did not like to disappoint him, I refused to trifle my time away on nothings. If I awakened during the night or too early to get up at dawn, I fixed my mind on rehearsing a new story, or in going over what I already knew, or in recalling some incident and all its details just for practice. Did the other boys find life easy? Could they daydream all they liked and fritter their time away? Then it was because their elders had no plan for them. My grandfather had a plan for me, and that was why he had to be stern, to carry it out. In truth, I was his very heart, and he was a kind man by nature, but he wanted me to be a storyteller, and he spared no means to make me one. You owe it to your people, he would say. If you fail them, there might be nobody else to remind them of their tribal history. So determined was my grandfather that he even took me back to the very spot where I was born, that there he might pray for me to have a clear mind. It was a long and hard journey, and we walked all the way. Whenever I grew weary, being only 8 years old, he carried me on his back. It rained every day, but we pressed on. The place was called Sandy Bend, on the north side of the beautiful Capeskashel River, flowing eastward, far to the south of the Platte River in Nebraska. I never visited since. That lonely day, my grandfather and I were the only humans in those parts. We came to the exact spot, on a little hill overlooking the river. It was smooth and hard-packed with white sand, a round spot like the inside of a teepee. The rain stopped and the morning sun came out, dazzling and blinding me. Come, stand here, grandson, in the very center, my grandfather said. This is holy ground, for it was where you came into life. And so I stood in the center of the round white spot while my grandfather moved a short distance away, and there sent out his cry in my behalf, that I be enabled forever to hold captive everything I hear. Some men were great warriors, some were seers, some were hunters, some doctors of the sick, some workers of miracles, and some diviners. It was believed that all such men were holy, and that they succeeded in their undertakings in proportion as they enjoyed supernatural help. Of Woyaka, the people said, surely he must enjoy more supernatural help than any other storyteller, for he is the greatest of them all. Woyaka was a strange man in certain aspects. He did not enter freely in the banter and good-natured jokes that went on about him. His eyes were fierce and searching, and he went about with a great preoccupation that everlasting set him apart and made ordinary men uneasy in his company, unless he was telling a story. Then he came to life, and both he and his hearers were lost in the things he so skillfully related. Otherwise, he walked alone. Ordinary human camaraderie was not for him. Nevertheless, he held a universal respect that was close to veneration. He was showered with gifts and welcomed into any camp circle where he chose to stay for a time. He had no desire for things and promptly passed such gifts as moccasins and wearing apparel to others who needed them more. He seemed to prefer being unencumbered by things other than his mental possessions. People boasted, "Did you know that Woyaka is staying in our teepee at the present time?" Women from everywhere brought such dishes as were considered delicacies for him to feast on, though everyone knew that he ate only to live. Many went further. Whenever they wished to act as handsomely as possible, they made a public feast, and there announced to their guests that it was Woyaka who was feasting them. Though he had had no hand in it, in such ways did the camp circles manifest their appreciation of so famous a man in their midst. After the evening meal, which the children of Black Eagle's group could hardly eat, so great was their excitement, they hustled around getting ready for their first story hour. "What shall I take to the grandfather? What shall I?" And I, they asked, pulling on their mother's skirts to gain their attention. Even Waterlily, copying the older ones as they insisted, wanted something to take along. A gift was no prerequisite, though Black Eagle would certainly reward Woyaka at the end. However, it was customary to greet newcomers with a gift, and Woyaka was no ordinary newcomer, a fact that the children sensed. Teton children loved to give. As far back as they could remember, they had been made to give, or their elders gave in their name, honoring them, until they learned to feel a responsibility to do so. Furthermore, they found it pleasant to be thanked graciously and have their ceremonial names spoken aloud. Forgiving was basic to Dakota life. The idea behind it was this: if everyone gives, then everyone gets. It is inevitable. And so old men and women preach continually, be hospitable, be generous. Nothing is too good for giving away. The children grew up hearing that, until it was a fixed notion. The girls met in the grandmother's teepee for a final briefing. Always bent on making well-behaved women of them, she directed them thus: "Now as you enter the teepee where the great man sits, move so quietly so as to not attract attention. There are men sitting with him. Say nothing and keep your eyes well down. At the same time, observe from under the eyelids just where to step. Do not be clumsy and trip over other people's feet. It is rude to even step over any part of a human's body, even if your feet do not touch it. So go straight to the honor place and there present your gift." She turned to the eldest granddaughter, Leaping Frog, saying, "Grandchild, you know the proper side of the fire to walk in on, the left-hand side, and the proper side of the fire to walk out on, the right-hand side. So you lead the way, holding your little cousin by the hand. Sit like women, never cross your legs like men, and be sure to keep your skirts pulled well down over your knees." To Leaping Fawn again, she said that your little cousin, young as she is, does the same. She must begin learning now. Above all, sit up straight. Do not loll. Remember that no woman reclines in the presence of men unless she is too ill to know. All this had been told the girls many times, but it was only by tireless repetition that proper habits could be fixed. Cautiously as they had been instructed, the girls entered the teepee and approached the guest. One after the other they murmured, "Grandfather, for you," and made their gift. Then they took their places, barely aware of the man's quiet thanks for explanations of praise over the pretty gifts, moccasins and such things, from the adult guests present. They were far too busy in seating themselves correctly and tucking their skirts about their legs, with only the tips of moccasins showing, and thus they sat all evening, composed and prim, and quite different from the pile of irrepressible small boys in continuous motion on the other side. Leaping Fawn was a well-bred girl with a sense of propriety. "How tractable she is," women said of her. "Such a good girl." She was called good because she fell into pattern easily, the exact opposite of a girl named Alila from the neighboring settlement, who had been coming regularly as of late to play with the girls of Black Eagle's camp. Though she was likable and friendly, Alila was at heart a young rebel, who deliberately broke little rules of etiquette just for the fun of it. "There," she seemed to be saying, "I've not conformed, and where is the dreadful result?" Leaping Fawn had her troubles in trying to keep Waterlily still and in the proper posture. Her short legs would not stay flexed right, and her skirt slipped up each time she moved, which was often, exposing chubby knees. Fortunately, she fell asleep almost at once, and Leaping Fawn was free to fix her whole attention on the stories. "I shall first tell you how our people caught the buffalo in the days before they had horses," Oyaka began. Then he smoked a while in silence, until his youthful hearers were wondering just how, and growing more eager by the minute to find out. When the people could not find any meat, when all the deer and other animals conspired to hide until all the food was nearly gone, and a bad famine was certain, then they called upon a buffalo dreamer to help them. A buffalo dreamer was a man who, when he went fasting on some lonely butte, was visited by the spirit of the buffalo, who promised to be his brother for all time. "Call me when you are hungry," he said, "and I will come. Sing this song I am about to teach you, and then I shall know you." And he taught the buffalo dreamer a beautiful buffalo song, to be his alone. In after years, if another man wished to sing that song to entertain his friends, he must first say, "This is the song of such an one, a buffalo dreamer with great power." Then his listeners could not say he had stolen it. Now, when the buffalo dreamer had to call upon his brothers, he first made himself ready and worthy to receive power by purifying himself in the sweat bath, by fasting and praying all night in a special tepee, and by abstaining from all physical appetites, so he might keep his pending task sternly before him. For that was the way to be sure of obtaining the gift he sought. Next day, all of the people went out on open ground, away from their teepees, and there set up the small travailleurs poles that their pack dogs dragged with loads bound to them. These poles were set up as tripods, close together, like the frames of teepees, around a circle. Now every woman and child took a place behind this circle, each one armed with a stout club with which to strike the travailleurs poles when the time was right. Meanwhile, all the hunters stood back of the women with their arrows ready on their bows. And so they stood, waiting, hoping, though as yet there was no sign of the buffalo anywhere. Then the holy man emerged from his tepee of preparation and made his way toward them. Outside the single opening in the circle, he stopped and talked mystically. That is to say, in sacred language, he related his vision wherein he and the buffalo spirit became brothers. "Do you remember? It is I, the man to whom you made that promise," he said aloud. "My children are hungry. They cry for food. I have no choice but to trouble you, my brother. A vow is a vow. Keep it then." So he flung out a challenge. Then he sang his holy song from his vision. Over and over he sang it, and paid attention to nothing but his song, a crying chant that had no ending. And as he sang, he walked to and fro in front of the entrance, looking like a buffalo rampant himself, for he was wearing the head and skin of a buffalo, and for the time he was a buffalo, talking to his own kind. And did they come? Most certainly they came. Looming large through the falling snow, they appeared over the hill and headed in a long black line straight toward the circle. A magnificent buffalo bull led them, and his eyes aglare he approached, frightening the people. But they knew they must stand their ground. Without their share of responsibility, the undertaking would fail. Everyone must cooperate, for that was where the power finally lay. Hurrying past the holy man, who sat still saying and walked to and fro without seeing them, they entered the circle and began moving in a mass around inside. to the accompaniment of the continuous clatter and clatter and clatter of wood on wood with which the women and children made, striking their clubs in rhythm on the dog travois poles. The singing of the holy man, the clatter, the pace of the buffalo never slackened. Meantime, each hunter picked out his animal and shot it from over the woman's shoulders, aiming to kill by hitting the animal in the right spot. Arrowheads were priceless. Let everyone count. And soon the tribal leaders called a halt. Stop. It is enough. Our friends have kept their vows. Once again they have given themselves to save us. Once again they have extended hospitality to us. Let us kill no more than we need. It is enough. And suddenly all was still, even the holy man singing. And then, in the deafening stillness, the lead buffalo came to his senses, and he had seemed to walk in his sleep before. The next time he came to the opening, which he had passed by time and again, leading others after him, he turned and went out, and the rest went also. On and on, in a single line, as deliberately and surely as they had come, they went, until they disappeared over the hill. They knew they would not be shot at from behind, for they and the Dakotas were friends. And then came the ritual. The holy man cut off the tip of the tongue of the largest bull, the finest cow, the prettiest calf, reverently tied them into a bit of buckskin painted red. These symbols of the buffalo sacrifice were buried while the people wailed ceremoniously as for dead relatives. Thus did our ancestors get food, when all else failed, and with the help of the great mystery. Thus early they learned that man cannot manage alone, and hungry as they were, nobody touched the animals until the ritual was decently finished, and then there was happy feasting again. After this, Woyaka repeated some short myths, long familiar to the children who had never tired of them, and then he dismissed them, saying, "That will be enough for now, grandchildren. There will be many evenings that I shall sit here, whenever you want to hear stories come, for I have many to tell." As they rose to go, and while Leaping Fawn was trying to rouse the sleeping Waterlily, Lilia startled everyone by asking, "What will they be about, grandfather?" Alila never minded speaking out. "They will be about many things, of how the birds taught the Dakotas to play, of how the west wind and the north wind struggled for supremacy until the west wind emerged victorious. You should also hear about the story of Ironhawk, the wonder man of the east, and of the falling star, the hero, and of the first man and woman to inhabit our world," he added, with one of his rare chuckles, "and such a time as their son had in managing his wives, corn women, and buffalo woman, for they were jealous of each other. It is from the son of the buffalo woman that we roving Tetons come. Is it any wonder that we love our buffalo brothers who sustain us so patiently? While they live, we shall not die." And the children went home singing, "While the buffalo live, we shall not die."